So UFC Fight Night Dern versus Hill did just wrap up, and we're going to be kind of talking about who I think the UFC should match up their winners of the whole card up with next. And obviously in the main event we just had the winner, Mackenzie Dern. Tapology is doing that thing where it isn't loading for me, but thankfully I've got everyone kind of loaded up already. She did call out Rose Namajunas, and I do really like that, and I did think about that as a potential idea. But the problem is, I just don't know what Rose Namajunas is doing. I don't know if she wants to fight. Dern versus Namajunas would be a fantastic headliner of a fight night, maybe, or on the pay-per-view, main card of a pay-per-view. I think that could make sense. But I was kind of thinking maybe Jessica Andrade would be like more willing to take the fight, you know what I mean? So I'm kind of thinking Jessica Andrade to take on Mackenzie Dern. I know Andrade was KO'd recently, but she likes to fight often. UFC probably wants to go back to Brazil sometime later in the year, so I wouldn't really mind seeing Jessica Andrade versus Mackenzie Dern. The next one is Anthony Hernandez. He just beat Emin Shabazi and he's now on a 3-fight win streak. If you do look at the UFC rankings and you go to the middleweight division, everyone in the middleweight division that's ranked near the bottom or just outside the rankings is either booked up, or I just don't think that they would want to fight Anthony Hernandez. Like I was thinking maybe Mikhail Olakchaychik, but do I think Mikhail Olakchaychik wants to take on another grappler? Absolutely not. So I've actually got him matched up with Jack Hermansson here, because if you look at Jack Hermansson, he doesn't have a fight booked. He did have one booked, but he's pulled out, I believe, of a couple of fights now. So, yeah, I think Anthony Hernandez versus Jack Hermansson makes sense. Gaslam's going to 170. I'm pretty sure Imavov is booked. Allen is booked. Curtis is booked. Muniz, they're all booked. They've all got fights booked. So, yeah, Jack Hermansson's kind of like the next step, I think, for Anthony Hernandez's career. And I think he does deserve the ranked opponent even as high as the top 10. Emily Ducote just lost to Lupita Godinez, so obviously Lupita Godinez is going to be wanting a jump up in competition. Once again, you've got to go to the rankings, and also if you go to just outside the rankings, they're all booked up. They're all booked up. They've all got fights booked. I was kind of looking at these here. Maybe she could have fought Angela Hill, but Angela Hill just took a lot of damage. She probably wants to take a lot of time off. So I'm actually kind of thinking of Michelle Waterson-Gomez taking on Lupita Godinez. That kind of makes sense. Michelle Waterson-Gomez isn't too afraid of taking on up-and-comers, and she looks pretty good against Luana Pinheiro. And in my opinion, that's actually a really winnable fight for Michelle Waterson-Gomez, because although Lupita Godinez did look really good in that fight, it was Emily Ducote, and Lupita Godinez struggled with an opponent which in my opinion isn't as good as Michelle Waterson-Gomez in Cynthia Calvillo. So I think that's a good fight that makes sense. Joaquin Buckley won his welterweight debut in the UFC against Andre Fialho, so I think that the fighter that he should take on next in the UFC welterweight division is Khaos Williams. I don't really need to sell you guys on this one too much. This is like a prelim of a pay-per-view headliner. Maybe you could headline the prelims of a weak pay-per-view, be on the prelims of a strong pay-per-view. It's a banger fight, Khaos Williams versus Joaquin Buckley. Maybe they could even do it for UFC 290. I know that's very close, so maybe not, but maybe more like UFC 291 prelims. Joaquin Buckley versus Khaos Williams makes all the sense to me. Diego Ferreira defeated Michael Johnson. The title run doesn't start now. If MJ won that fight, I genuinely would have done Michael Johnson versus Matt Frivola or Dan Hooker, because I know Dan Hooker and Michael Johnson have exchanged words, but it ain't happening. Diego Ferreira, he come back after a lot of injuries. He's an older guy. He probably does want to take on more veterans. Like maybe he could take on like Jim Miller type or whatever. But I was actually thinking of an up-and-coming grappler, because obviously Diego Ferreira is also a grappler, although he did KO Michael Johnson. Joe Solecki. Joe Solecki, in my opinion, he's deserving of a step up in competition, man. This guy is 5-1 in the UFC in the lightweight division. On a win streak now. He beat Alex De Silva back in 2022, and then he was meant to fight Benoit Saint-Denis, but unfortunately that didn't happen, so he took on Carl Deaton III. He needs that step up in competition. We don't know how good Joe Solecki is. He's just not fighting as high level competition as what Diego Ferreira is, so I want to see Joe Solecki tested against Diego Ferreira. I think that'll be a fantastic fight, and I do look forward to it if it happens. Vyacheslav Borchev beat Maheshate, and I think that he's deserving of another fighter that is a striker and also lower down in the rankings, because Borchev is now 2-2 in the UFC, I think. He was on a 2-fight losing streak before he beat Maheshate. So Nazim Sadikov, I think, is an appropriate opponent. Nazim Sadikov is a very good striker, but he was struggling with Evan Alder a little bit before it was stopped due to that doctor stoppage. But Nazim Sadikov fantastic striker. Both of these guys will probably strike against each other if anyone is going to go for takedowns. It probably would be Nazim Sadikov because I have seen him wrestle before. But I look forward to this fight if it happens. Nazim Sadikov versus Vyacheslav Borchev makes a lot of sense to me in my opinion. Karolina Kowalkiewicz defeated Vanessa Demopoulos, and I think she should fight the loser of Emily Ducote versus Lupita Godinez, and that's Emily Ducote. You know, Emily Ducote, she's borderline ranked because she was actually ranked before she lost to Angela Hill, and then when she lost to Lupita Godinez, she's obviously not ranked anymore. But I think that fight makes sense. Emily Ducote taking on the older fighter in Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Kowalkiewicz, you know, she's almost 30, I think she's like 37, almost 38 years old. She's probably thinking of retiring soon. And I think Emily Ducote would be like a suitable opponent for her. Winnable fight for Ducote, winnable fight for Kowalkiewicz. I think that makes sense. Gilbert Urbina dominated. Orion Kosuke looked really, really good in that fight. And I've kind of given him another fighter at 170 that's lower down in the rankings, probably looking for an opponent about now. And that is Ramiz Brahimaj. Ramiz Brahimaj is a fantastic grappler. I believe every single win of Ramiz Brahimaj's career is in the first or second round by submission. It's absolutely insane. He would be a pretty good test for Gilbert Urbina. But the problem is he hasn't fought since 2022. He's pulled out of a couple of fights, I think, due to injury. I think that's a good fight, though. Urbina versus Brahimaj. It will test Urbina's grappling. It would also kind of test Brahimaj's striking as well. It would just be a good fight. I think it's just a fight that does make sense. And then Ali Latifi lost to Rodrigo Nascimento Ferreira. For Rodrigo Ferreira, I've actually given him a ranked opponent. Not too sure if he really deserves a ranked opponent, but he is borderline ranked on the unranked area of the rankings. So I've actually got him against Blagoy Ivanov, and it would be a good test for Rodrigo Ferreira because Blagoy Ivanov is kind of like a guy that does test a lot of up-and-coming fighters. You know, he actually beat Marcos Rogério de Lima recently, and he has fought like a lot of up-and-coming guys just kind of in his career. I think that makes sense. He's number 15 ranked. I feel like maybe if Rodrigo Ferreira wins that, he could become ranked. He looks pretty good against Ali Latifi, although it was a split decision, which is just like absolutely insane, but it is what it is. Chase Hooper absolutely dominated Nick Fiore. Definitely that pick goes on the wall of shame for me. I picked Nick Fiore in that matchup. I mean, so did a lot of other people as well, but man, Nick Fiore, huh? He's just not as good as I thought he was. I mean, Chase Hooper almost knocked him out. Like, Mateus Rebecki couldn't do it, but Chase Hooper can. And Chase Hooper did. He dominated Nick Fiore. At 155, I don't know how I feel about Chase Hooper, but we still need to consider the fact that he's super young and he will make developments over time. So I've given him a pretty winnable matchup against Gabriel Miranda. If you guys don't know who he is, he stepped in on very short notice against Benoit Saint-Denis and just got absolutely dominated. He got absolutely dominated in that fight, but he's also primarily a grappler. Pretty ideal for an opponent for Chase Hooper. I don't know if Gabriel Miranda is still kind of around and fighting, but Gabriel Miranda versus Chase Hooper, in my opinion, makes a lot of sense. You know, it's a winnable fight for Hooper, but it's also a somewhat winnable fight for Gabriel Miranda as well. And I think it's probably a fight that Gabriel Miranda will probably take because Chase Hooper has looked, I'm going to sound mean, but he has looked pretty pathetic in a few of his fights. He didn't look pathetic in this fight, but he looked absolutely pathetic in his last one. So we'll see. Natalia Silva absolutely dominated Victoria Leonardo. This opponent that I've got for Natalia Silva actually was actually in Victoria Leonardo's corner, and that is Andrea Lee. Andrea Lee's on a bit of a losing streak right now. She probably should have beaten Macy Barber, but it is what it is. She now needs to fight down the rankings, and she just cornered Victoria Leonardo to an absolutely dominant loss to Natalia Silva. So maybe that could be a way of like her camp to get one back, or Andrea Lee to get one back. Andrea Lee can take on the girl that just beat Victoria Leonardo. So Natalia Silva versus Andrea Lee, it makes sense. Andrea Lee is also ranked. Do I think Natalia Silva necessarily deserves a ranked opponent right now? Maybe not, but she is 3-0 and she's been dominant in her 3 performances. So yes, she probably does actually deserve a ranked opponent. I just talked myself into the pick that I made earlier on in the day. I think Andrea Lee versus Natalia Silva makes a lot of sense. And then Takashi Sato lost to Themba Gorimbo. Takashi Sato probably going to get cut from the UFC. But Themba Gorimbo gets to continue. He gets to keep going. I've got Themba Gorimbo versus Blood Diamond. Blood Diamond is, I think he's from Zimbabwe, but he trains at City Kickboxing in New Zealand. He's probably going to fight on the Sydney card in Australia, UFC 293. I believe that's in September. Blood Diamond versus Themba Gorimbo. I think that makes sense to me. It would be a big step down in competition. Well, not really, actually. Orion Kosuke was, yeah, okay. The point is, I think it just makes sense, right? Yeah, Blood Diamond taking on Themba Gorimbo. Themba Gorimbo, he's definitely got a lot to work on, but he seems to be pretty motivated to keep working, to keep trying. So I think Themba Gorimbo versus Blood Diamond makes sense. Winnable fight for Themba Gorimbo. Also a winnable fight for Blood Diamond if he can keep the fight on the feet. So, it is what it is. I don't really mind it. Aside from that, I don't really know what you can do with Themba Gorimbo right now, because there's, I don't know, it doesn't seem like there's like a lot of super winnable matchups out there for him. So that's kind of everything that I've got there. I wanted to get it out quickly because I've got to go live for Haney versus Lomachenko. So I'll see you guys in the next video.